Welcome and thank you for standing by. All participants are in listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I would like to turn the call over to your host, Deb Rivera. Deb, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. All right, well, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Deb Rivera and I will be the host for today's webinar, Data at Your Door, the Census API Decoded. Today, our presenter will introduce you to the API through a few core concepts to show you how to harness the power of the Census API and do a live demonstration of the Census API in action. Before we get into our presentation, I'd like to go over some housekeeping items. Today, I am joined by my colleagues, and we will be providing support to our speaker by monitoring the chat and the Q&A panel. To send you some helpful links related to today's webinar and also answer as many questions as we can through the duration of the webinar. We are encouraging participants to use the Q&A panel in WebEx to submit questions and look to the chat panel for links and other helpful information that we will share. We will also have a live question and answer session towards the end of the webinar. Participants who would like to ask a question are welcome to use the raise hand icon, which appears next to your name in WebEx, and that will prompt us to open your line, and then you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask your question. As always, we are recording the webinar today, and all of the materials for this training will be available through the Census Academy website. Please note that with the Q&A session, we will focus on answering questions related to the platform, data.census.gov, or I'm sorry, the API. We will not be able to go in depth to answer questions on 2020 census products or data. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. And now I would like to hand things off to our presenter, Tyson Weister. Thank you, Tyson.
Great, thanks, Deb. And thank you all so much for joining the webinar today, Data at Your Door, Census API Decoded. Whether you are new to the API period or you've been using APIs before but haven't used the Census Bureau's API, this is going to be a great introduction to get you started. If you're new completely, it may sound like a lot, but it's really as simple as finding a sample URL and editing it to get the data that you want. In order to get there, we are going to go over with some basics of the API in general. We'll talk about how to build an API request just so that you're familiar with the different components of a URL so that you can recognize them and make sense of what's happening. Then we'll transition to the API in action in a live demonstration. We have 3 examples prepared today, and that's going to take the bulk of what we're doing for today's purposes. So before we get to that live demonstration, just want to touch base on a couple things for the API. At the Census Bureau, we do have a few different types of APIs. The Census Data API is the part that has the raw statistical data from programs and surveys across the Census Bureau. In addition to that, we do have a geocoder API that will serve as an option for you to specify an address or batch of addresses and find the Census Bureau geographies associated with that address that it falls within, as well as the latitude, longitude. And for geographers that want to make maps, we do have Tiger Web Services on an API as well to give you the boundaries and shapes. Most people using the API would be interested in the data, and that's our area of expertise. That's what we're focusing on today. The Census Data API, it's a standardized way that allows you to access data, whether you're a software developer or just a general data user. There's definitely advantages for the API. Some use cases is to create mobile and web applications and drive interactive data visualizations. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of how we do this here at the Census Bureau, but this is a public API, so it's available for external audiences to use it for the same types of things. Another use case is that it can connect directly to statistical software like SAS and R. Advantages of the API, it allows you to access only the variables and geographies you need without having to download bulk file downloads or full tables and just extract the data you need from those large downloads. You also get immediate access to updates from the API. If there were to be an update made, you would be requesting that information in real time rather than downloading it once, storing it on your computer, and accessing that downloaded data. And another advantage of the API for any data user is that you have more data than what's available on data.census.gov. There are more data sets available, more surveys, programs, as well as more historical information in the API compared to data.census.gov. One example of the API in action is our primary dissemination platform, data.census.gov. It is built completely on the API, so as you are navigating the website, in the background, the system is making requests for data to our API in real time, and that's what's feeding all of your tables, maps, and charts on your screen. Typically, most data users we work with go to this source to access the information. Today, we're going to be going directly to the API to get the data we need. And we also use the API at the Census Bureau to create data visualizations. I've posted just a couple of examples here on screen for you. One is the American Community Survey data wheel that has some popular statistics for various geographies, the online version of that. And then on the right-hand side is another visualization about what you can learn from the American Community Survey for popular topics, and it shows you a map at the state level. So when you go to the API, you will find 1,251 detailed data sets to choose from. And those data sets fit into the 17 high-level surveys and programs that I'm showing you here on screen. For today's demonstration, we're going to pull an example from the Population Estimates Program, the American Community Survey, and the Decennial Census, but I do want you to be aware that there are other demographic and economic programs in the API as well as the planning database. Geographic coverage for these data will be dependent on what that particular survey or program provides data for. So do keep in mind at the Census Bureau, the decennial census provides the greatest geographic coverage, followed by the American Community Survey. So those cover almost all of the geographies that you see here on screen. The American Community Survey goes down to the block group level, decennial goes down to block. Other surveys and programs may provide data just for selected types of geographies. We're going to show you exactly where you can find out the list of compatible levels of geography for your data set in the API. And what I am also showing here is that the geographies in red are compatible with certain economic surveys and censuses. The developers page is your first stop shop for working with the API. When you get to the page, I just wanted to point out a couple of high-level details. One is that you'll see a link to the discovery tool at the top of the page. We're going to be working in the discovery tool today. On the left-hand side, you'll also see an option to access the available APIs on the Discovery tool, some guidance for developers to include the API user guide, and then you'll also see this option here that says Request a Key. So just for your awareness, you only need an API key if you're making a large number of requests to the API. To be specific, it's needed when you make more than 500 requests per IP address per day. So we're not going to work with them today, but in the event you do need one, it is certainly free for you to get it. And within the discovery tool, there are a few different options. There's an HTML version to be viewed on your web browser, XML and JSON versions for machine reading purposes. We're going to be working in the HTML version of the discovery tool today. And when you go there, you're going to see information provided for each of your data sets, including the data set title, description, and primarily what we're going to be looking for is the example API queries. And we're just going to tweak those slightly to get the geography and the variables that we want and need. And we'll be going to the variables list for each data set in order to find those variables. Moving on, before we get there, we wanted to show you the different components of an API query what they mean, how they're separated. You certainly don't need to memorize how to build an API request from scratch. I mentioned we're going to be pulling example queries and making small tweaks to edit them, but I did want to run down what a request looks like so you're familiar with it. So you can break it up into a few core components. First, every request for data for the API will start with api.census.gov/data. Next, you'll choose one of those 1,251 data sets. In this example, I'm showing the 2018 vintage of the Population Estimates Program Characteristics Age Groups data set. Then you'll put $get equals. That is you signaling to the API that you're about to list some variables and geographies that you want data for. The fourth step here, I have some variables listed out. Pop is for population total. GeoName to give me the geography label associated with the geographies that I'm getting data for. Date_description and date_code equals 11. In this case, that signals that I'm asking for data from the July 1st, 2018 vintage of the population estimates. And race equals 10, which gives me data for the Asian alone or in combination population group. For each data set, you're going to be able to find a list of variables for that data set, and I'm going to show you how to access that in order to find what you're looking for. After you put those list of variables separated by a comma, by the way, you can include up to 50 in a single API query, then you'll specify your geography. So in this case, the geography portion of this URL says &for county with a wildcard, &in state 24. So the wildcard is always going to give you all available values for that particular option, in this case, all counties, and state 24 happens to be the state code for Maryland. So when we put this all together, we are asking for that data, and you'll run the request, you'll press enter in your web browser, and then you'll get the results. In this case, we'd be looking at population for the Asian alone or in combination for all counties in Maryland. When you run that output, if you're viewing it in your web browser, for today, we're going to be working in Google Chrome, so our results are going to look like this. They're going to be viewable on our screen to an extent. You'll see the very first row will give you that list of variables that you requested, and then your results will be read in the same order. So this is telling us that 7,391 Asian alone or in combination people lived in Charles County, Maryland, based on the 2018 vintage of the population estimates from July 1st. So again, we went through that not so that you have to memorize those different components, but want to show you what those are, what they mean. We're going to show you now in a live demonstration how you would go about creating that from scratch by pulling from the example URL. So specifically at the end of this section of the demonstration, what I want everyone to walk away with is feeling comfortable finding available data sets on the API, navigating the API discovery tool to get that example query, making some tweaks to edit that URL to give you the exact geographies you're looking for, as well as the variables you want and need. You'll be able to view the results in your web browser. And at the very end, we'll also show you how you can save this as a CSV file and reformat it in Excel in a readable format. For today's demonstration, we have 3 quick examples, and we're going to start out as basic as possible, giving you a single estimate for a single geography. We're going to base this example from the Population Estimates Program, and we're going to answer the question, what was the Hispanic population in California as of July 1st, 2019? So I'm going to go to the live site here. You are welcome if you'd like to follow along. What I will say as well is that we are going to be moving through these. This will be recorded for you, and I do have slides with step-by-step instructions. So if you miss something, if you happen to try to follow along, don't worry, you'll definitely have resources to look back on. First thing, I'm going to go to census.gov/developers. So I'm just going to type that in the URL of my address bar, and I have Google Chrome open. On the developers page, what I'd like to do first is click the available APIs. There are more than one way to get to the data set that you're interested in. I find the available APIs option on the left-hand side is the most user-friendly. Once we click that slide I showed you earlier with those 17 high-level categories, this is what you're going to see in these panels. So I see something for population estimates and projections. I'll go ahead and drill into that option. And here I see just one option for population estimates and projections. So pretty straightforward that I click this link within that section. When I get to this page, there are a few options to choose from. There's population estimates APIs, population projections if I want to look at future estimates for population, as well as the international database. I want population estimates, so I'll click population estimates APIs. And as you work through those clicks, you'll eventually get to something for every data set that's going to look similar to what you're seeing here. Generally, some sort of description at the top and options to click between the different years. The population estimates are the official source of population totals in between the decennial census. And I'm going to use the 2019 vintage for this demonstration. We're still working on adding some data from the 2021 vintage. So in order to show you what I wanted to show for the Hispanic, we'll go to 2019. And within each of these years, you'll typically see some options to choose from. So you'll just want to read the different headers. Population estimates gives you population totals. Components of change would give you information for births, deaths, and migration. There's national monthly population estimates. Demographic characteristic estimates by age groups. This is what I want because it includes Hispanic. And housing unit estimates. So once you've narrowed down which data set you're interested in, the one I want is demographic characteristic estimates by age groups, you'll want to look for the section that says examples and supported geographies. In this case, it's in the second bullet point. So here I'm going to go ahead and click examples and supported geographies. And zoom out a little bit. This should look familiar to some of the things we showed on screen. It is the portion of the API discovery tool for this data set. Typically, we just want to pull the example URL and then find the variables for this data set to plug in. So first thing I like to do is click examples. There is some other information here that may be of use to you. For the purposes of today's demonstration, we're going to focus on examples and variables. So when we click examples, you can see on the left, it gives you the 3 levels of geography that are available for this data set: national, state, and county. And we wanted to look at the Hispanic population in California. So we want the state level, it's summary level 040. And when you look to the right, you see 2 example URLs to choose from. We know there's different components of the URL. At this time, I just want to focus on the geography. The first example says ampersand for state wildcard. The wildcard tells us we would get data for all states. The second example, ampersand for state :01, would give us data for state code 01 Alabama. I'm going to choose the first URL here. I'm going to highlight it and copy it. That would give me data for all states, and then I'm going to tweak that to get data for California. So in a third tab, I'm going to open up and paste that into my URL. And depending on the way you copy it, you may see the API key portion at the end, ampersand key equals. You can go ahead and delete that if it's there and press enter. So here we see some results. We get data for all states. And I just want data for California. So one way that you can narrow this down is search the content of the page. If you press Control F and start typing in your keyword, if there's a text match on the page, you'll see the result. And I can see the state code is 06 for California. So I'm going to tweak my geography. Instead of providing data for all states, I'm going to replace the asterisk with 06 and press enter. I like to press enter in between each step in case I make a minor typo, then I know exactly where I went wrong and I can correct it and move forward. So with those few clicks, we were able to get to the example page, pull the best example URL and edit the geography to match exactly what we want. The last thing that we need to do is get data for the Hispanic population instead of the total population, which is what we're getting by default. So when you navigate backwards to this page, it also contains the variables link. So under demographic characteristic estimates by age groups, I'm going to click the third bullet point. And this takes me to the portion of the discovery tool that lists every possible variable in this data set. There's only 18, and we can see pretty quickly HISP provides data for Hispanic origin. One other thing I wanted to point out here, anytime you see default displayed, that is an indication that you're working with a categorical variable. There are a few ways that you can find out what the possible values and corresponding categories are for a particular variable. Sometimes you can click the variable name directly in the API and it will tell you. In this case, it doesn't tell us what value is referring to Hispanic, what value is referring to not Hispanic or Latino. But when you go back to the population estimates page, do know when you scroll to the bottom, there is a list of the categorical variables that they've put together for you. So you have the information all in one place for your reference for every possible variable that's considered categorical in this data set. When you scroll through, you will see the three possible values for the HISP variable. Value of 2 gives you data for the Hispanic population. Value of 1 gives you data for the non-Hispanic population. And a value of 0 gives data for both of those groups, which essentially is total population. So we know exactly what we're looking for, the variables HISP. We're just going to add it to our query. So I copy HISP and go to my example URL that I've been working off of. What I'm going to do is type a comma after pop and then paste HISP and press enter. So the default, we can see we get data for every possible value for this variable. Total population for value 0, not Hispanic population for value 1, and Hispanic population for a value of 2. If you would like to further fine-tune this request to just get the row of data with the one estimate we're interested in, you can put additional information at the end of your URL. So I'm going to click into the address bar after HISP, type ampersand HISP equals, and I want the value of 2. And press enter, and we've updated our query. So you can either use those categorical variables as the default, or if you'd like to specify something a little more specific, you can use this language to do so. Please know that categorical variables aren't overly common in ACS or decennial census data sets. You do see them occasionally. They are used pretty regularly in other data sets, so I wanted to make sure that we included an example. Moving on, in the spirit of talking about ACS and decennial census, I did want to give some background information before we dive into our next example. Because there are so many variables in these data sets, they use a code-based naming convention. So remember, when we pulled up the list of variables from population estimates, there were only 18 in that data set we were looking at. Some ACS data sets, for an example, have over 35,000 variables. So the only real way to track them is with a code-based naming convention. They may seem random to you at first glance, but we're going to walk through exactly what they represent. At this point, we're just showing a screenshot that in this case, the variable dp04_0046PE gives you data for a value of 53.6. This represents the percent owner-occupied housing units. So to break this down on the next slide here, what you're going to find is that the variables always start with the table ID. So DP04 is referring to that table ID. 0046 refers to the 46th row of data in that data table. So if you counted down from the first row, you would want to make sure to skip any rows that are just for labeling purposes only, like this housing tenure row. And when you get to the 46th row that actually contains data values, that would take you to what you're seeing here on screen. PE means percent estimate. Other variables you may see from the American Community Survey will end in E for estimate, M for the margin of error, PE for percent estimate, as we saw, and PM for percent margin of error. As a note, in order to work with ACS data, you do need to know what type of table you're going to be interested in getting that variable from in order to actually go to the API and access it. The reason is that the data in the API are organized according to the type of table. So for instance, if you wanted detailed tables, you'd be working with URLs ending in ACS1, data profile, the URL ending in profile, comparison profile, C profile, and so on. If you're ever not sure which one to start with for the American Community Survey, we do highly recommend the data profiles. The reason is that they cover all topics of the American Community Survey in just 4 tables, which translates into fewer API variables to search through. In addition to that, they contain the most popular statistics in the form of totals and corresponding percentages. So with that background of the code-based naming convention, let's show you how you can expand your API expertise, get data for multiple estimates for multiple geographies from the ACS. For this example, we're going to look at median income and home ownership rate across all counties in California. I'm going to go back to my page and close out all those tabs and actually start me fresh from census.gov/developers. Do want to point out very quickly the discovery tool link here. I mentioned it a couple times. I'm going to open that just to show you in the HTML format what we're doing by clicking through the available APIs on the left. This should look familiar. We viewed this for individual data sets in our previous example. This is actually pulling you a list of every possible data set. So I'm showing 1,249. If you go through this is another option for you to get to the data set you're interested in, but it's a little bit more machine readable than human readable. So that's why we're using this option on the left-hand side here to click available APIs on the left, make a series of clicks, and get us to a tailored view of the discovery tool for our data set of interest. But do know that either option is available to you. I'm going to continue to use available APIs on the left. I'm going to drill into ACS. And there's a few options to choose from. In this case, I'm going to choose American Community Survey 5-year data. The reason I'm going to choose this is so that I get data for all counties in California, regardless of population size. Just like in our previous example, we get some information about the ACS and the types of tables at the top. You'll confirm you're clicked into the 2020 vintage, and then look for the table heading that you're interested in. We want a data profile, so I'll scroll to the data profile section. And then I'm going to click here, the examples. So we typically work with examples and variables. We're going to do it again here. Once I click examples, in this case, it took me directly to the list of example. On the left-hand side, you can see the levels of geography that are available, the 3-digit summary level code, and notice there's quite a bit more than what we were able to get from that population estimates data set. For my example, I wanted data for all counties in California, so I see state, county, summary level 050. I'm going to read the geography portion at the end of these, ampersand for county with a wildcard. That means I get data for all counties. Next one, ampersand for county, wildcard, ampersand in state wildcard, all counties across all states. Same way of getting the same data as the first call, it's just a different way of writing it. And then the third example here gives me data for county 037 in state 06, Los Angeles County, California. I'm going to choose the second example query. I'll be able to edit that pretty easily to get what I want. Just like before, we'll open a new tab, paste that, delete the portion that says ampersand key equals, and then we'll press enter and run that query. If I need a refresher on what the state code is for California, I can press Control F. Go ahead and type that in and see that the state code that's being repeated is 06. Clicking into the URL, I'm going to replace the asterisk with 06 and press enter. So here I'm getting all counties in California. You can see that in the URL and in my results. So the last thing I need to do is tweak the variable that was provided by default with the variable that I actually need for home ownership and median income. So in the first tab that we have open, we'll go to the variables page for this data set, 2020 ACS data profile variables HTML. We'll get a list of the variables. Notice there's a lot more than what pop estimates had. They're code-based, but that's okay. The nice thing about these data profiles is that you can press Control F, and this is still usually a manageable list that you can search the page to find what you're looking for without necessarily knowing what table the data come from. So here I'm going to press Control F and type in my first keyword for median household income. I'm just going to type in median. It takes me to a result. There are 24 instances of the word median on this set of variables. The first one says that it's giving me the estimate from the income and benefits section of DP03. It's providing data for total households, and it's providing median household income for total households. So this is actually exactly what I'm looking for. Median household income for all households, DP03 underscore 0062E. So what you want to do is copy that variable name or jot it down very carefully. I like to copy so I don't make a mistake. Then I go over to my Open tab. I still have the sample variable highlighted. I'm going to paste DP03 underscore 0062E to overwrite the sample variable and press enter. And I did get results, so no errors. I'm going to repeat this process for the next variable that I'm interested in, homeownership rate. So clicking back to that tab that had that list of variables, I'm going to press Control F and type in another keyword. In this case, I'm going to type in owner. There's 98 instances of owner. It takes me to homeowner vacancy rates at first. So I'm going to press enter again. I'm not interested in homeowner vacancy. Then I get to something that looks like it's of interest to me. It's an estimate from the housing tenure section of DP04. It provides data for occupied housing units, and this is telling me how many of those housing units are owner occupied versus renter occupied. So the variable that ends in E is giving me the estimate. I want the variable below it that ends in PE, which gives me the percent of owner-occupied housing units. What I'm going to do is on the left-hand side, copy that DP04 underscore 0046 PE. I'm going to go to my other tab I've been working off of and add that variable here. What you need to do is click into the URL, and after it says 0062E, type a comma, add your next variable, DP04 underscore 0046 PE, and press enter. And you can add up to 50 variables in the same API query in this fashion, separating them with a comma. You'll read the results. As an example, for Alameda County, California, we can see that median household income was $104,888 based on the 2020 ACS 5-year estimates, and the percent of housing units that were owner occupied was 53.6%. And this is really illustrating to you some key benefits of using the API. Notice that we pulled just the two estimates that we wanted, nothing more or less. If we were to go to data.census.gov, we would have to download full data tables. In addition, we've pulled data from two different tables and put them into a single view, also something that you're not able to do on data.census.gov. So moving on, we mentioned there is a 50 variable limit, and we wanted to show you how you can download an entire table using the groups functionality. For this example, we're going to look at the decennial census and how can I access table P2 from the decennial census redistricting data from the 2020 census for all metropolitan, micropolitan statistical areas. I mentioned we use the group functionality. That's where in the variable section of your API query, you simply put group, and then in parentheses, you put the table ID that you're trying to get data for. In our example, we're going to be putting P2, and this is going to give you results for every variable from that table, regardless if there's more than 50 variables in that table or not. So let's go ahead and work through that final example here. Just like before, we'll go to census.gov/developers. Then once this loads on the left-hand side, I'm going to click that available APIs. I see a high-level category for decennial census, and then a few options to choose from. The one I want says decennial census 2020, 2010, 2000. There are a couple different sections here. The one that we want is the redistricting data, Public Law 94-171. We'll confirm we're still clicked into 2020. And you're pretty much always going to start by pulling that example URL. So I want the last bullet point, 2020 PL examples and supported geography. Zooming out a bit here, we'll look for the examples link. And then we'll look for the geography we're interested in on the left. I wanted metropolitan, micropolitan statistical area. It's summary level 310. We'll pay attention to the geography portion of these URLs. The first one gives me data with a wildcard for all metropolitan, micropolitan areas. And then the second one gives me data for metro micro area number 35620, so the New York metro area. We actually want data for all, so I'm going to pull that first query, paste it in a new tab, delete the API key portion, press enter. So I'm almost where I need to be. The last thing that you need to do is insert the group function, and you can insert it in place of any variables. So when I'm clicking into the URL here, I actually don't need the variable for name. It's going to be included in my results automatically. I'm just going to type group in lowercase letters, and then in parentheses, put the table ID that I'm interested in. Here I want P2, and then press enter. And this gives us our results. In this first block, you're going to see every variable. And then the next block will give you the data values for each geography that you included as you go across. So you can see right off the bat, it's not nearly as readable as what we've been working with so far, simply because there's more variables that we're getting results for. What I'd like to show you at this point is how you can save the results in Excel as a CSV file and then make some formatting improvements. So for any of the queries that we've worked on today, you can right-click the page and click Save As. And if you'd like to save that as a CSV file, here I'm going to name the file first, P2 2020, all metro micro areas. The key is that you need to manually put .csv at the end of the file name and then change the dropdown to all files. Click Save. And I'm using Chrome, so I'll click in the lower left to open up that CSV file, which is going to open it in Excel for me by default. And now this should look very similar to what you've seen previously on data.census.gov downloads. Each geography that you see has its own row. As you follow the row across, you get all of the estimates in a flat file format that are available, helpful for sorting or machine work. So with that, you may have noticed there were a couple things missing and some special characters in that file. We're going to go through now how you can reformat that file in Microsoft Excel to clean it up a little bit. Specifically, we're going to remove special characters using find and replace functionality. We're also going to add the labels that go with each variable name. We're going to do this using the VLOOKUP function. And in the interest of time, I am going to run through this a little bit more quickly than I've been moving so far. But I, again, want to point out there are step-by-step instructions in the PowerPoint that will be available to you as a resource to look back on. And then this webinar is being recorded. So know that there are resources for you. The first thing that I want to do is get rid of these open brackets, closed brackets, and double quotation marks in Microsoft Excel. In the upper right, you'll see either this magnifying glass or something that says find and replace. Once you click that, you'll see an option for replace. So this is where I'm going to first type in the open bracket in the find what box. I'm going to leave the replace box, the replace with box blank, and click replace all. So this is me telling the system that I want to find every instance of the open bracket and replace it with nothing in order to delete it. Well, I'll repeat this for the closed bracket and for the double quotation mark. Close that out, and with that, we've cleaned up this quite a bit. We don't have any of those special characters anymore. However, I'm going to right-click on this row and insert. One thing that we don't currently have is the label that goes with these variable names. So what does P2_001N mean? One way that you can do this is pull this in bulk using the VLOOKUP function. So under the variables page for this data set, I'm going to click the HTML variables for the redistricting data. And I'm going to run through this quickly. So I'm going to delete .html from the end of this and press enter. You can also save this result. This is the list of every variable and their corresponding label. If you right click the page and click save as, what I want to do is put this in a CSV format as well. So I'm going to follow the same steps, .csv and all files. I'm going to open this up. In column A, it's going to give me the variable name, and then it's going to give me the nice label, which is what I want to pull into my file. So first thing I'm going to do, just like before, is clean this up. So I removed those special characters. Next, I want to select all the contents of this. So I'm going to press Control A, and I want to right click and copy this. Because what I want to do is add this as an additional sheet into the file I've been working with. So here with my list of results, click the plus sign and paste that information. So I have the information readily accessible to Excel. The last thing I have to do is insert the formula to tell Excel how and where to find a match for this variable, and when they do find a match, to feed the label into the cell below it. If you type equals VLOOKUP, the open parentheses, and I'm going to click cell C1, then type a comma. So this is me telling Excel, find a match for P2_001N. I'm going to click onto sheet 1, select everything that I just pasted, then press F4 one time. Type a comma. That tells Excel to find a match somewhere in that selection of text. And then I'm going to type a 2. That tells Excel when it finds a match to pull the corresponding label from column B of this spreadsheet. Then type a comma and a 0 to say that I only want to find an exact match. Put that closed parentheses and press enter. And when you've done it successfully, you'll see the label has populated. In this case, the label is total, meaning it's giving data for total population. You can look for that green box in the right-hand side and drag it to other cells so that you can do this in bulk across other variables in your spreadsheet. There are variables that end in A. Those are annotations. If there were any special characters associated with the value, you would see the special character populated in the corresponding variable that ends in A rather than in the numerical value that ends in N. And I know I went through that part a little quickly, but there are those step-by-step slides. One additional tip I wanted to point out here is that if you have the name in the first location of your API query, sometimes there's a comma in the geography, and that can cause an issue when you follow the steps that I just showed you for saving it as a CSV file when it tries to decide which of those values should go in the columns. Sometimes it splits it across geography. So you can see an example of that here. Galesburg, comma, Illinois metro area was split between A and B, but then it's misaligning all of your other data. So the value 55,698 should actually be in cell B2. Everything's off a little bit. If you run into this, all you have to do is don't make name the first variable in your API query. So you can add a different variable. Maybe you want to add the GeoID as an example, and that will sidestep this issue altogether. Wrap up with some resources for learning more before we take your questions to summarize some benefits and limitations of the API. The API allows you to get the exact variables and geographies you need. You can quickly update your query to get data over time. Most variables are consistent from year to year, and the API has more data sets than data.census.gov. Limitations: you can only request data for one geographic summary level at a time. If you want data for California and all counties in California, that's 2 separate API calls. Not all collections of geographies are available. For instance, all census tracts in the US. Now let's talk about the consistency over time and just lay that out in a little more detail for you, especially with the code base named variables. Many times you'll find no change. For instance, if you're pulling median household income between 2016 and 2018 from the data profiles, you just update the year in your query. If you're pulling data for the population under 5 years from data profile 5, you would be pulling that variable ending in 0005E in 2018. In 2016, it's 0004E. These variables can change for a number of reasons, but keep in mind they're that code-based, table-based naming convention. So you can see in 2018, the 4th row of the data table is sex ratio, males per 100 females. So if you pull that variable in 2018, you get a value of 94.2 for the state of Maryland. If you pull that same variable in 2016, you're getting data for the population under 5 years old with a value in excess of 362,000. So usually they're consistent, but do check for changes. Before we take questions, wanted to point out we do have a resource page dedicated to help for the API. We encourage you to check that out for the user guide, additional videos, and the recording for this webinar. And we are here for your questions. Please email us at census.data@census.gov for more help on the API. And we've also included the link if you have a training request for the API. And at this time, I'd like to turn it back to my colleague, Deb.
Great, thank you, Tyson. All right, so in just a few minutes, we will begin our question and answer session. Today, we will be taking your questions over the WebEx audio. You can use the raise hand icon, and that should be located either at the bottom center of your screen or next to your name, and that will prompt us to open your line. You'll then be able to unmute yourself to ask your question. But first, I would like to invite you all to share your thoughts about today's webinar through an evaluation survey. Your feedback helps us design future training sessions and also lets us know how we can improve our webinars. So the link to the evaluation, I'm going to go ahead and send it in through the chat right now. And if you could just take a few minutes to fill that out, perhaps while we go through the Q&A session, we greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions remaining after we conclude our session today, please feel free to reach out to either one of the 2 email inboxes listed here. If you are a member of the public, we encourage you to reach out to the Center for Enterprise Dissemination. That's at census.data.census.gov. And members of the media can contact the Public Information Office at pio@census.gov. So with that, let's go ahead and open it up to take questions. Anybody that has a question and would like to ask it over the line, please go ahead and raise your hand icon now. And we'll just give that a few minutes. All right, let's go ahead and open the line for Rand here.
I just unmute myself. Hi, this is
Hi
Rand.
there.
I'm speaking from IDPH. And first of all, sorry I joined this session late. I have one question. Like, are you planning another session on the same topic in near future?
Great, thank you for the question. At this time, my best recommendation is that the session would be recorded. So I would encourage you to tune into the recording to see the portion of the session that you missed. Those are generally posted within a couple of weeks. So I'd invite you to check back.
Could you please share the link where I can check the session?
Absolutely, I can go ahead and send that through the chat.
And one more question. If I'm not finding any table on API, where should I check it? Because I don't exactly remember the table, but I was trying to download some data and I was not finding that particular table in the API. So
yeah, thanks for your question. We have quite a bit of tables available in the API. So if you're having trouble, I would invite you to send the specific data request to us at census.data@census.gov, and we can help you track down the source of the data.
okay, great. Okay, thanks for the help.
Thank you so much. Okay, let's go ahead. We have another question in queue, and this is again for SCF Organic Farm. Can we go ahead and unmute their line?
You able to hear me now?
Yes, hi.
Oh, okay. Thank y'all so much for what I'm checking in is there with this API, we do farming and we want to know if you could use this for finding data on farming that's in your state or nationwide. You could plug those variables in to find different census data on farmers throughout the nation or throughout your state or county? Or is there a custom, somebody that does that as a job?
Oh yeah, thanks for your question. So I would also encourage you to write in for a more detailed response from us. For farmers, that could be potentially a data source from the American Community Survey if you look at occupation data. So we could look at what data we have for occupation being farmers. And we also have some information from our economic census and economic surveys for agriculture as an industry. That would give you data for the number of businesses and some additional information regarding the business side of it. And all of those data are also available on the API, but you could also access them on data.census.gov as well.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we look forward to that email.
Oh, okay. Okay, you have a great day. Thank you for answering my question.
Thank you. Okay. All right, we do have a couple more questions. Let's go ahead and unmute the line for JW. Once we unmute you, you'll be able to unmute yourself.
I just want to say thank you for providing this webinar. It's very helpful to see. And I did just wanted to point out, instead of having to copy in the URL, it looks like you could also probably right click and do a add new tab, and it doesn't carry over the and key data. So you didn't have to manually delete it every time. I just discovered that when I was going through and following along.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you pointing that out. I kind of intentionally copied it so that I would have to delete it just in case someone ran across it. But yes, you are absolutely correct that when you're on a link of pages here, if you simply right click these examples and open in a new tab, that they do not have the API ampersand insert your key here. So that was definitely a good tip to share.
Sure, no problem.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for your question. We will now unmute Francisco's line. Reina Francisco.
I've been looking for information for mining companies. Is there any way to get some information by this system or not?
And I got the question as that you're interested in data on mining companies and wondering if you
Yes.
can get that from the API. Is that correct?
Yes, those kind of. Is there any way to get by this system?
So yes, because our economic data are included in the API as well, they are available. That would give you data for mining businesses. It's not going to give you data that would identify any particular company or business, but if you wanted to look at the number of mining businesses in a particular geography, let's say your county, those data are available through the economic census, county business patterns, and a few other that you may be interested in checking out. In like the previous question, those data are also available on data.census.gov as well as the API.
Okay.
If you need some, oh,
Yes, I will. Yes, I've been asking by email some support, but I haven't have it yet. So thank you for your comments, and I will keep looking this way.
yeah, you're welcome. Check out those data sets and also feel welcome to reach out directly to this email address, census.data. It will get you to our team and they can assist you as well with a little bit more step-by-step instructions.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your question. Let's go ahead. We have two more questions in queue. Let's go ahead and unmute Charles Simon's line.
Thoroughly. So I'm interested in doing as much programmatically as I can, and I've asked a couple questions during the course of it. And for example, requesting the data labels, or to find out more information about the variables that change from year to year. I imagine all that information there is in the documentation, but the documentation is pretty extensive. So I'd probably get into a conversation that's very, very detailed. Would the best next step for me to be just to email the team, or should I go straight to a training request, or I can have a dialogue with somebody and have all those questions answered?
Yeah, thank you for your question. The level of support that we provide is kind of getting the information directly from us. So in terms of your question about pulling in the labels automatically, I'm not aware of any other documentation we have on hand other than what I showed today, but I would recommend potentially checking out the R package because those labels are pulled in. So if you're an R user, you might want to look at Tidy Census is what it's called. That may help you in terms of that particular challenge that you were asking about. I would also encourage you to join the Slack community and pose your question to the community as a whole in case there's other data users that have some insight they're able to share with you in addition to what we can share with you. As far as variable changes from year to year, the only thing that I've potentially shared with someone is that you could kind of use Excel to look for those changes in bulk. So if you're interested in that information, feel free to email us and we can get you connected if you're interested in that option. Otherwise, I would also encourage you to pose that to the user group in case there's any other users that have additional ways that they can programmatically share and give you some more guidance.
Okay, is the user group the Slack community that you mentioned?
It is, yes.
And how do I find, what is it? Where do I get to?
Great question. Let me go to census.gov/developers because I think it has changed recently. But it should be pretty accessible to you on the landing page. Developers Forum is another word for it. So it's that very first link under featured Developers Forum, and that will give you the option to join.
Okay.
I won't walk through it from here, but that's all you click.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for your question. And we have one last question in the queue. This question is from Judy. Can you unmute their line? Thank you so much.
But yeah, my name is Judy. I'm an academic librarian with California State University. And I was wondering on the training requests, are these something that's like outreach to perhaps teach people how to use the types of data that you have here? What does a training request consist of?
Yep, so there's a great question, and this actually transitions into more information that I have. There's a couple different training options at the Census Bureau. One is the training that our team does. We typically work with national organizations. We also specialize in some of the more difficult tools like microdata access or the API. So you're welcome to email your training request into our branch, and that would just be an email generally explaining the audience, what you're hoping to get out of the training request, if there's any topics, geographies, or areas of interest that you think would be worth highlighting, as well as if you're specifically wanting this to focus on the API access point, or if you're just interested in census data in general. That email address is said.cedsci.outreach@census.gov. Again, that comes to our team. In addition to that, I did want to point out we have data dissemination specialists across the country who helped host this webinar today on census.gov/academy. And you can also reach out to them with training requests. I've included their contact information in the lower right.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, because I'm in a very liminal state. I actually obviously provide instruction to economic students, but it's like I can only leverage so much expertise. So it's like, you know, putting people in the right place at the right time is important. And then also I work with sort of a nonprofit space that does entrepreneurship. And so I can also see an intersection with need for data. And so being able to ask, right, or perhaps having a census individual share might be a really wonderful thing. So I appreciate the information.
Yeah, sure thing. We look forward to working with you. And I will also point out as other training requests that our team makes available are the workshops. I did want to point out we are the communications area for the API, data.census.gov, and the microdata access tool. We offer these workshops regularly if you'd like hands-on practice for using data.census.gov. It's great to be familiar with it, even as a check for your API queries and to cross-reference. Always helpful to be familiar with both sources of accessing data. Next month, we have a brand new workshop, making the most of mapping in data.census.gov, and we did want to highlight that here for you. There are multiple dates to choose from, so if you're interested, please visit the link at the bottom.
Thank you so much, Tyson. We don't have any additional questions in queue at this time.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining. We look forward to continuing to hear from you, and we hope you tune in to future trainings.
This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.